I want to thank everyone for joining today's session. You are joining us for an information session on the Brownfields Redevelopment Incentive Program and the application process in order to access that program. I am Caitlin Giles McCormick here with the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. The goal of today's program that will be discussed is pretty specific. And if it's not exactly applicable for you, we have lots of other programs and funding options that are available through NJEDA, and we encourage you to check those out. We'll drop a link in the chat for those and a lot of the other supporting materials for today, so you can take a look at that. But thank you for joining us about this specific program, the Brownfields Redevelopment Incentive Program. To officially get us started and to dive into the topic material, I'm going to shift things over to Elizabeth Limbrick, who is the Director of Brownfields and Sustainable Systems. Elizabeth?
Thank you very much, Caitlin. We're so happy to be here today to welcome all of the attendees to really talk about brownfields. The program you're here for is the Brownfield Redevelopment Incentive Program. I'm sure most of you know brownfields are really those hidden assets, really a great opportunity for us to improve quality of life for the local economy, increasing tax base, creating jobs, increasing property values, and cleaning up the environment. It's really just an opportunity to turn these sites into a community asset. We don't want to let these sites just stay contaminated. We want to clean them up and bring them back into that productive reuse. And recognizing that the legislature and the governor have provided this program that we have really built out, which is the Brownfield Redevelopment Incentive Program. It's part of the Economic Recovery Act. And for brownfields at EDA, this is by far our largest resource. And again, so excited to be able to bring this to you. And I want to thank all the colleagues who've been invited. And again, thank you attendees for being here today to go through this with us. So what we're going to do is first, we're going to give you an overview of the program, talk a little bit about the eligibility. Then my colleague here, Melissa Dolinsky, who is team lead on the Brownfields and Sustainable Systems team, is going to talk you through how to actually put together an application. And then we're going to come back, talk about some tips, and then we'll do some Q&A. So first of all, this is a program that provides a tax credit or an incentive for brownfield redevelopment, and it's throughout the entire state. We are very well funded. We have $300 million. And this program specifically funds all phases of brownfield redevelopment, from your assessment and investigation all the way through your remediation, and also includes demolition and disposal of structures. It includes asbestos abatement, contaminated paint and wood removal, and other infrastructural remedial activities. I think the fact that it includes demolition and asbestos abatement is really special and is going to make this program very useful for bringing back those brownfield sites. There's not a lot of other programs out there that fund those types of activities. So I'm really happy that this program could include that. This program does allow for a redevelopment project. We use that term. That's the term that's used in the legislation as well, to be a remediation only project. And as we go through the slides, you'll see there are going to be some advantages to having a remediation only project. And we actually anticipate that many people will come in with a remediation only project. There'll be a little bit less compliance involved with that. There is the potential to stack this with other funding programs. And in particular, I have to always give a shout out to our other program, Aspire, which is a real estate program, real estate tax credit program. We have a little more information on that later as well, and historic preservation as well. And of course, it can be stacked with other programs that are with NEDA and external as well. The tax credit is transferable, meaning it can be sold. I think that's a nice feature of the program, and you'll see that there are higher incentives in special areas of the state. So some key features on this program. First, I think you're probably asking yourself, well, who's eligible? Am I eligible? Eligible entities, it's very broad. It can include private sector, it can include nonprofits, it can include government entities like municipalities, redevelopment agencies, counties, etc. What types of sites are eligible? Well, it has to be a brownfield site. And then the next big thing is that the applicant cannot be in any way liable or responsible for the contamination at the site. That is something that DEP is going to be looking at, and we'll talk a little more into that later. But I think that's going to be one of the things you really want to look at when you're thinking about your project. Important to know that you do not need to own the site. And again, just want to reiterate that this program, unlike maybe some other programs that you may have seen, this program is available throughout the entire state. The types of activities that are eligible, we've talked about this a little bit, but it's remediation. That's what it is. It's for remediation activities. The costs need to be reasonable. DEP is going to also be reviewing that. And we do anticipate that people will be including a contingency in their application because, again, we understand that, brownfields do have some inherent uncertainty associated with them. And again, a project can be a remediation only project. The tax credits are awarded via a competitive process. And what we mean by that is there will be a date which we open the applications, and we'll get to that at the end of this webinar, so stay tuned. And then there'll be a date at which they close. And then we'll take all of those applications, we'll review them. Those that are eligible will go through the process and get scored. For this first round that we're doing, out of 100 points, you need 25 to move forward. So it's not a particularly high bar. We have a lot of money, so we don't actually anticipate it being overly competitive, but just know that because it is a competitive process, that dictates how the process works. The tax credit is a one-time tax credit, and it's issued in the year that you complete your remediation. And some other key features are prevailing wage. So you're probably somewhat familiar with construction prevailing wage if you've worked with EDA before. Construction prevailing wage does include certain types of remediation activities like well drillers, excavation, things like that. And Department of Labor is the one that has that list of titles to which it applies. And that applies to the site for 2 years following the issuance of the tax credit. So prevailing wage, construction prevailing wage is attaching to the site. In addition to that, this is a little different. This next one is building services prevailing wage, which attaches for 10 years following your project completion. What I will tell you about building services prevailing wage is that it's not actually a big list of titles, and you can take a look again at Department of Labor has that list, but it's not something that will probably have a huge effect on your project. It's things like janitorial services, window cleaners, site security, things of that nature. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, how much can I get? So let me start actually on the right-hand side of this slide. If you are in one of these special areas, which is either a government restricted municipality, and there are 3 of those, which are Atlantic City, Patterson, and Trenton, or in a qualified incentive tract. And I did include on this slide a snapshot of our map, and you can go to our website to check out the mapping tool to actually see. But those areas that are shaded are the qualified incentive tracts. If you're in one of these areas, you get up to 60% of your remediation costs, up to a total cap of $8 million. And the equity contribution is only 10% in this area. If you aren't in one of these areas, then you default to what's on the left-hand side, which is you get up to 50% of your remediation costs, up to $4 million, and your equity contribution is 20%. Also wanted to share with you sort of a roadmap that takes you through so you have an understanding of how the process works. So first, again, applicant submits an application by the pre-established deadline. We take those in, look at which ones are eligible, review them, score them. Then the projects are presented to our board. For those that are approved by our board, they then move to an approval letter. And I actually should pause for a minute. First of all, I had a couple of footnotes on here. When the applications are reviewed, DEP does again look at the reasonableness, the cost reasonableness. We do expect it'll take about 6 months from the time we receive applications till projects are presented to the board. Once you receive a board approval, you have about 6 years. You have 6 years. You have 6 years from board approval to complete your redevelopment project. You will get an approval letter. You have 1 year to satisfy the conditions of the approval letter. Then you enter into a redevelopment agreement with the authority. That's when you then start your remediation. When you complete your remediation, you'll get some certifications, show us that it's complete, and then you will be issued your tax credit at that time. And again, we do have that building services prevailing wage requirement. You will have 1 year to submit certain documents to DEP as well as EDA when you complete your remediation. So you will have 1 year to do that. I mentioned that there is scoring associated with this. This slide just lists the major categories that we have for scoring. So we'll be looking at things like environmental history, the impact of the contamination, and whether there's a physical hazard, something like maybe there's a danger of a building falling on pedestrians walking by. That would be something like a physical hazard. We're going to look at site location designations and land use, things like, is it an area in need of redevelopment, in need of rehabilitation? We'll look at the impact on the surrounding community and the public benefit. And an interesting one on this is really proud to bring is that we're going to also be looking at whether or not the board of the applicant is diverse and representative of the community. That is optional. You don't have to give us that information. You just won't receive any points for that piece if you choose not to opt in on that. We also look at project viability. We'll look at your project team, economic feasibility, as well as environmental justice and climate resiliency. Those are very important priorities under Governor Murphy's administration, and we're happy to be able to incorporate those into this program. As far as basic eligibility, I already mentioned this, and I wanted to dive a little deeper. It's about the applicant not being in any way liable or responsible for the discharge at the site. So there's a spill act that exists, and that really lays out people who are liable and responsible for the contamination at the site. It is strict liability, joint and several liability. So, take a look at that, talk with your attorneys, but also talk to DEP, because DEP is the one who is going to be making this determination. And you can reach out to them, and I would encourage you to do that now. Start looking at that now. And we have an email address right here on this slide, edataxinc@dep.nj.gov. And you can reach out to them and start understanding if your project might be eligible. Some of the things that we've thought about, though, are ways to keep and preserve your eligibility under this program. So one is that rather than owning the site, maybe you want to lease the site. You could delay your closing so that you don't close on the property until after you've entered into that redevelopment agreement with EDA. And DEP has also said that they would allow projects that enter into a pre-purchase administrative consent order with them to be eligible for this program. And we have those materials on our website about how to enter into one of those. Some other basic eligibility criteria: you need to be in good standing with our sister agencies, DEP, Department of Labor, Department of Treasury. You do need a letter of support from the governing body. Governing body is typically city council. The mayor is not an acceptable substitute. We know that this is going to take some lead time, so we also encourage you to start working on that now. The applicant also needs to certify that either they have not started their cleanup activities other than assessment and investigation, or if the applicant has started cleanup activities, they need to certify that they could not have known the full extent of the contamination without having started those cleanup activities. Cannabis businesses are not eligible for this program, and programs that have received a reimbursement through our legacy program called the Brownfield Contaminated Site Reimbursement Program are not eligible. That's a very small handful of projects that are out there. Of course, your application needs to be complete. It needs to be signed. And we do have an eligibility tool on our website to help walk you through these questions. A couple other things, and these are pretty standard for EDA, that the project would not be economically feasible without the tax credit, although we do allow for a reasonable rate of return. You have to demonstrate a project financing gap exists. You have to have the developer equity contribution that we talked about earlier, depending on where you're located. It's either 10% or 20%. You need to demonstrate to us that you will have access to perform the remediation, and you'll need to adhere to green remediation standards. If it's a remediation only project, that's it. If you are doing something larger than a remediation only project, then you would also need to adhere to green building standards. The eligible activities, again, it's very wide range. Assessment, investigation, typical remediation activities. I think, again, the interesting pieces here are that it also covers hazardous materials assessment and survey, waste disposal. We are allowing for up to 24 months prior to application for environmental assessment and investigation activities, not the cleanup, but assessment and investigation up to 24 months prior to submitting your application. And again, it's that demolition, asbestos abatement, I think, that are really key for this program. And some other planning activities like a remedial action work plan, stuff that's directly related to brownfield redevelopment. All right, so what are the ineligible activities? This program only funds remediation. That means we are not paying for vertical construction under this program. So vertical construction that is not part of the remediation is not eligible. Property acquisition is not eligible. Financing fees, legal fees, incentive consultant fees are not eligible. Environmental consultant is, but somebody that you have are working with who is going to put together your application for you, that is not eligible. EDA fees are not eligible. Again, if you did any cleanup prior to coming in, that's not eligible, but those assessment and investigation activities within 24 months are eligible. More than 24 months prior, not eligible. I've mentioned this before, but again, the remediation costs have to be reasonable. And so your cost estimate is going to need to include a breakdown that DEP will be able to review to make that determination. Again, start talking to them now, get out in front of this. If the costs are not reasonable, either you're going to need to take a haircut to what DEP deems reasonable, or you're going to end up with a project financing gap that's going to need to be plugged in a very short amount of time. So get out in front of that. A little bit about the project financing. We've already talked about the first two items. For the application requirements, you will need to have, again, a project cost estimate. You're going to need to have an appraisal. You're going to be filling out a pro forma. You're going to give us information about your sources and uses and any development subsidies. We need documentation of all of your sources. If your project is not remediation only, you would also need a market and feasibility study. Some of the takeaways here: account for all your costs, including contingency, because when you come in and you get approved by our board, that's the maximum you're getting. We cannot increase the amount of the award once the board has approved it. Make sure you have your applicant equity contribution. Be thinking about how you're going to bridge the gap between the time that you come in, you do your work, you pay your contractors, and you actually get the tax credit. You're going to want to talk to a syndicator and a broker. You're going to want to make sure you incorporate a reasonable return on your investment. And again, DEP is going to be looking at that cost reasonableness. Some other program requirements I've mentioned before: we have green remediation requirements that applies to all the projects. And then again, if it's not a remediation only, you would also have green building standards. We have reporting requirements. There is a deed notice requirement at the end of this, and that is to account for the possible sale or transfer of the property so that the conditions of our redevelopment agreement are met and followed by the new owners, things like the building services prevailing wage. When you complete your remediation, you'll need a certification from an LSRP. There's also a requirement regarding getting a response action outcome, or RAO. We also have an excess profit provision in here. It's only about excess profit. So again, at the time of board approval, we're going to be, you're going to be providing your application. It may include a reasonable rate of return. That'll be approved by the board if within 4 years of receiving the tax credit, you sell the property or transfer the property. We're going to go back and look and see if you exceeded that amount. If you exceeded it by a certain amount, then we're going to take and participate in that profit with you. So 20% comes to us, you get to keep the extra 80%, but that's only for the excess profit piece, not for the entire profit. I just wanted to include a brief slide on this. I don't want to spend a lot of time, but as far as claiming the tax credit, because a lot of people do ask, it can be applied to insurance premium tax and corporate business tax. Again, we actually anticipate most or all of the people that come into this program will be actually monetizing the tax credit, selling it. So the person who receives actually at the end, the tax credit can apply it to these types of liabilities. It can be transferred, but one time only. However, when you do transfer it, we will allow you to transfer it in increments as low as $25,000. There is a floor on the tax credit sale of 85 cents on the dollar. We're actually seeing in our other programs, most folks are getting over 90 cents on the dollar, but just so you know, there is a floor. And if you did have low income housing associated with your project, it can go down to 75 cents on the dollar. As far as an ideal project, we think something that's a larger scale, remediation or demolition. We've already talked about, the liability aspects. So a lot of times a property maybe that you don't own yet, or that you have entered into a pre-purchase agreement with DEP, something where have a good idea of what the contamination is and what it's going to cost to clean it up, so that you can really have a good cost estimate. A project that uses prevailing wage, and a project that does have that project financing gap. I did want to share with you this slide that has information about the fees for the program. We have divided it up into small projects, which are defined as projects that have up to $5 million total cost of remediation, and large projects for over that amount. And you can see here the different fees. And I did mention earlier about stacking with Aspire. Again, this is another one of our programs here. It provides funding for commercial, mixed use, and residential real estate projects. It provides between 45% and 60% of project costs. Aspire does include a cap on the soft costs, and this program does not. So one thing you might want to do is, if you're coming in for Aspire, you could carve out your environmental consulting costs and bring them over to Brownfields. That allows you to have more room in that soft cost cap over at Aspire. Things to consider: Aspire is a rolling application, where this one's competitive. So you really need to think about this, have a clear path before you apply, vet your project out, talk with us, talk with the Aspire team. And the application should not have conflicting information, because some of the same people in underwriting will be looking at both of the applications. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Melissa, who is going to take you through how to fill out an application.
Thank you, Elizabeth. One second here, just to get everything going. Okay. So thanks, Elizabeth, for giving us an overview of the program. I want to just point out, before we get started with going through the application, that we have a lot of resources on our website and tools that are available for you to use. So you're going to see on the right hand of the website, there's going to be a lot of links and downloads. You can open up that application materials, and you'll see links to download all of our required forms. One very important thing on that website is the checklist. So here's a snapshot of the checklist. It's not the entire thing. So there's going to be links to download the different files on there, as well as letting you know what type of required information we'll be asking for you in the application. Okay, so before I get started, I just want to point out that I'm not able to cover the application in its entirety. I'm going to be highlighting some of the things that need a bit more explanation and that I want to just point out to make sure that people understand. So there will be a PowerPoint on that website that I pointed out to you previously. That's going to be the entire application laid out for you slide by slide. Okay, so let's dive in. This is what you'll see when you're beginning your application. So like many things in your daily life, you'll need to create a username and password. If this is your first time using the portal, you will click that blue registration button up top. And if it's not your first time, so if you've applied for another EDA program, or you're coming back to work on an application that's in progress, you'll use this sign-in page. And if you're experiencing any issues, we're asking that you reach out to our customer care line. So the phone number is here on the slide. It's 844-965-1125. And additionally, you can email customercare@njeda.com. So next, you'll see the sign-in page, and you'll click Brownfields Redevelopment Incentive Program. That will take you to the welcome page. So this is an overview of the program here. We ask that you go through it its entirety before you click on that blue Create button. Just one note before we get started, everything that's going to be have a red asterisk next to us is going to be a mandatory upload or field that you'll need to complete before you're able to proceed to the next page of the application. So here we are in the primary point of contact. So this is the contact that EDA will keep up to date. And it's going to be important that it's your best email address for us to get in touch with you. That's the way we can reach out if we have questions about your application, and we can provide status updates to you as you go through the review process. One thing I just want to point out here is that if the primary point of contact is not an authorized representative, the applicant will be prompted to enter that contact information for the authorized representative later in this application. And applications can only be submitted by a legally authorized representative. But if you are the legal representative, you will not need to complete that section. Okay, so here we are. We'll need some additional information about the applicant, some different details about the organization, as well as if you've entered into an oversight document with DEP or a pre-purchase administrative consent order, ACO. So if you answer yes to either one of these questions, you'll be prompted to upload those documents here on that page. A little more information will be needed on the next page. So we'll ask you if there are any obligations that we'll need to know about as you're proceeding through, as well as any responsibilities. So those will be with Department of Workforce and Labor, New Jersey DEP, or Department of Treasury with the interest, with the developer has an interest in. So if you're answering yes, you will get a pop-up window, which is displayed here on the left side of the slide. And you'll need to enter the permit information if you have a permit. But if you have a obligation or responsibility with a specific state agency, we ask that you enter some brief information here under the status text box. Also on this page, you'll be asked to upload an organizational chart of the developer, including all affiliates. That provides a summary description of the type of organization and the ownership structure. Okay, next up is diversity scoring page. So the first thing that I want to point out about this page is that it is optional. So this information would be used for scoring purposes only. So if it doesn't apply to you or you do not have the documentation, that is okay. You won't get points for that. However, the program, as Elizabeth said earlier, is very well funded, so we don't anticipate that will be oversubscribed. Applicants may elect to opt out of this section. But if you choose to fill out the section, you'd answer yes to that question. You'll be prompted to upload completed versions of our NJEDA forms. So that would be applicant identity certification document, individual diversity information documents, and analysis and supporting documentation. For consideration of diversity within the board members or managing members and partners, please note that no less than 2 separate application identity certification questionnaires, including identity details, must be submitted with the entity's application. Okay, so next, so as any good brownfielders know, we need to know about your project location. You'll be prompted to enter information about your site location, ownership information here on this page, so including your proposed redevelopment project. You'll click that blue Add Parcel Property by Owner button, and you'll get a pop-up window where you'll add the project location by ownership for each parcel. You'll hit Save, which will create a record in your application, and you'll need to repeat this as many times as necessary. All the block and lots must be included in your application that will be part of your proposed redevelopment project. So you may need to do this multiple times and have multiple pop-up windows and save those. You'll see them come through on your application when you go back to this page on separate lines. Here you'll also be prompted to enter your DEP site remediation PI number. If you don't have one, you can leave that field blank. And we've also created a mapping tool that will score factors that have already been classified by the state as important features to consider for community redevelopment projects. So you'll need to go to the website, use the mapping tool with your site, and then upload a copy of that mapping tool report here to this page. Okay, next up is some general information. You'll be asked to provide information about the proposed redevelopment project and whether this will be a remediation only project or will include non-remediation construction work. You'll also need to specify the proposed remedial action type. So those are unrestricted use remediation, limited restricted use remediation, or restricted use remediation. Sorry, my using a little bit here. Okay, so next the application will ask about cleanup activities that will be conducted prior to execution of a redevelopment agreement with EDA. We're going to ask you to detail that here in a text box and explain what those would be. And we'll also ask you to provide the projected number of permanent employees. So again, if you do not know, you can provide your best estimate of this time. It's okay for that to be an estimate. And if this question is not applicable to your proposed project, you can enter 0 here as an answer. Okay, so the environmental history of the proposed site is pretty self-explanatory. I'm sure most of you have a good understanding of what has happened at the site and can provide that to us. So we'll need the environmental history as well as its impact on the surrounding community. Here's where you will explain how your site meets the definition of a brownfield. Additionally, we'll ask you what type of contamination is at the site, and if there's been a discharge that poses immediate environmental concern, we will ask you to provide that documentation here. Okay, the next page, you'll see additional questions regarding the environmental history of the proposed site. Those are going to include things like contaminated building materials, on-site structures that pose imminent or significant threat to human health or safety, off-site mitigation, as well as if the site has been vacant or underutilized for 5 continuous years. So if you answer yes to any of these questions, you will be prompted to provide that information to EDA via an upload. On this page, you'll also be asked about public funding. So if the state of New Jersey has already invested public funding in the remediation of the site, we'll ask you to provide information like the source, the amount, and the status of that payment. Okay, next up is going to be community engagement. So we touched on this a little bit earlier. This is where we're going to ask you to provide that letter of support from the governing body or the municipality or municipalities. So if your project is in multiple municipalities, you'll need to get these from all the municipalities in which your redevelopment project is located. It's a critical piece. Again, I just want to pause and point out that the governing body will most likely need to pass a resolution, and that a letter of the support from the mayor is not an acceptable substitution. So if you're thinking about coming in, this is an important piece to start now, as it can be a time-sensitive issue. Okay. Then we'll ask you if you have any letters that you'd like to provide to us from community groups. Those are going to be optional uploads. Key personnel and strategic partners. So we're going to ask you for the name of your LSRP. We're going to ask you for the license number. We're going to ask you for experience. We're going to have you provide an organizational chart of the project team that's going to work on the project. So that will include your LSRP, your environmental consultants, your key team members, and other licensed professionals. So at this point, we allow you in the application to include other licensed or certified professionals. So when Elizabeth is talking earlier about the eligible activities, when we're talking about demolition, asbestos. So, a municipality will have you use a licensed P or architect to sign or seal documents. For asbestos, we're looking for that ADHERA, US EPA accreditation, certification. So that was where you would enter that information on the application. As I pointed out earlier on the website, there's going to be forms that need to be downloaded. So here we are at BRI PT01. That's our resume form. That's going to be needed to be downloaded and completed. Those are all available on the website. Remediation costs. So this is where we're asking you to provide the remediation costs, remediation estimate of your redevelopment project that must be prepared by an LSRP. We have another form here, so that's BRI PIO2, where we're going to ask you for your approach to redevelopment and the project cost estimate. So those are available on the website. Please take a look at them before you start, just so you can see the format that we're looking for things to be in. I just want to point out there's some additional information on this slide about remediation costs. So that means all reasonable costs by the developer and affiliate associated with the remediation of the contaminated site. So those don't include acquisition, costs incurred to the financing, legal fees. So one thing I just want to point out, it says incentive consulting fees. So an incentive consultant would be someone that would be helping you put together this application. It would not be environmental consultants. Environmental consulting fees are eligible under this program, as well as any NJEDA authority fees. Okay, next up is another mandatory upload. So that's BRI PI03. That's the cost estimate form. Again, it can be downloaded off the website. Important to review that before you're getting started so you can see the formatting of how that needs to be done. On this page, you'll also see an appraisal report by a third-party New Jersey licensed appraiser. Please note that this appraisal must be dated within 12 months of the application submission date. Okay. So if there's a contract, a purchase contract agreement for the proposed redevelopment site, you would upload that here. We also have a pro forma template that's available for download on our website. So you'd complete this pro forma as we've laid it out. We've put it in as an 8-year term. If your project is anticipated to be shorter, you're going to use that anticipated duration. Okay. Next up is the market or feasibility study for the site by an independent third party. So a market study is only required for the proposed for projects with proposed construction beyond remediation. So market studies will not be required for remediation only projects. Some very important information in the slide. Hold on one second as I go back. So that's going to note remediation costs. We're going to talk about remediation costs. Okay. Okay, so now we are to the sources of funding. Okay, so you'll download this sources and uses form off of our website, and you'll upload the completed form for all the sources of funding. So that's including the equity contribution and development subsidies that are available that are going to be on the application. You'll also need to complete an application contribution select section. So this will be a detailed explanation of the equity that's going to be contributed for the project. We would like you to please review this information in detail before and during the preparation of the sources and uses spreadsheet. So one thing I do want to point out is that if you're coming in for a remediation only project versus a large developer project, we're going to be looking at those finances and that backup documentation. So if you're demonstrating with that material, the finances and the documentation, that you're a larger project, you can't say that that's going to be a remediation only project. Okay, so if you select yes to the question that you've received, requested to receive, or otherwise anticipate receiving subsidies, there'll be another question that pops up here, and you'll need to complete the add development subsidies pop-up window. Okay, certifications. So we're to the certification page. So like I said previously, only if the individual filling out the application is not the authorized representative that you'll get to this page. Here you'll have to be prompted to download these forms and then upload signed copies of the acknowledgement and certifications here. Okay, CEO certification. So you'll need to download the CEO certification form and upload a signed copy. So even if you are the CEO who's submitting this application, you will need to download this and fill this out. I know that doesn't seem intuitive, but it's important that it gets signed by the CEO. And at this point in the application, you'll have the opportunity to download the partially completed application to provide to the CEO, as well as any additional reviewers prior to uploading that signed certification form. Okay, so we are in the home stretch now. We've reached the fee acknowledgement page. As Elizabeth mentioned earlier, there's fees associated with this program. So it's going to be projects up to $5 million has a $2,000 application fee, and projects greater than $5 million have a $7,000 application fee. The application fees are non-refundable, and the payments are made to NJEDA by credit card or check. Again, just want to reiterate that the application fee is non-refundable, even if you don't meet the eligibility requirements. So please utilize that self-eligibility, that self-assessment eligibility tool on our website before you apply. There's some further instructions on this slide, and again, the slides will be available to everyone, be able to be downloaded off the website by the end of the week. So there's some different specifics about submitting payment here. Just one thing of note, that we will not begin the review of your application until your payment has been submitted, and payment by credit card is preferable. And this is the final step. You'll reach the electronic signature page. So your application will be submitted once you click this blue submit button. So please do not click the submit button until you are completely sure that you are ready to go ahead and submit that application. The portal does allow you to save your application, come back to it. Your information will be saved in there, and then you can go back, toggle back pages, review it, and you can also add new information there. So please use that portal if you want to go ahead and save an in-progress application. It will be available for you to come back to it. So just some quick takeaways before I turn it back over to Elizabeth. To the asterisks, those indicate mandatory fields and uploads. The primary point of contact, very important. This is how we're going to be in touch with you, to reach out to you about questions, provide status updates, please make sure you use your best and current email address. An application in progress can certainly be accessed through the welcome page, and you can come back at any time and work on your application or change information in the application prior to submitting it. And make sure to include all your lot and blocks when you're inputting your project location. So if you're doing to do multiple pop-up windows, we ask that you make sure to double check that all of your lot and blocks are included there. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth to wrap up a few different things, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Melissa. And I have been in the Q&A, and I see you've been in the Q&A. We've been able to answer some of your questions that we've had along the way. As far as, oh, I'm one slide behind you. There we go. Some tips. First of all, make sure that you are looking at that application checklist we've put on our website. You won't have a ton of time to do all this, and I'm going to tell you in a moment how much time you will have. But make sure that you have everything. Start looking at it now. Things, again, that take a long lead time, like the letter of support from the governing body. Again, it's most cases it's city council. And that is something, you'll need to get on the docket. You'll need to get on the agenda. And that does take time. So, start looking at that now. We have FAQs already posted on our website. They are a great resource. We've thought of a lot of things, and others are going to have questions along the way too. And if they've thought of it, maybe it's something that you're thinking about. Definitely familiarize yourself with those FAQs. Get your questions to us. Our responses will be posted publicly because this is a competitive program, and you can reach us at the email address shown here, the bftaxcredit@njeda.gov. And also get ahead of things. I mentioned this earlier. Talk to DEP now. EDA taxinc@dep.nj.gov. Talk to them about your project costs, cost reasonableness, your liability for contamination, so whether or not you would be eligible, you can enter into that pre-purchase ACO, all of those kinds of things. Talk to DEP. They are the ones who are going to be making those determinations. And then just lastly, this was actually a question that sort of came up in the Q&A as well, but with limited exceptions, neither the developer nor the affiliate shall start any remediation or cleanup at the site other than the activities that are disclosed and approved at the time of board approval. That said, you're still at risk. There are conditions. You'll read our rules. The conditions are in our rules, but you'll also get them in your letter of approval that are going to apply. Things like prevailing wage and affirmative action and the green remediation. And if you fail to comply with them, you may disqualify yourself. So, make sure you're familiar with everything. And, we're looking forward to having folks come into the program. I'm going to make the announcement now. So we are opening applications tomorrow, June 21st, Wednesday at 10 a.m. So they will become available for you at that time. Come visit our website. We are going to keep the window open for 3 months. So September 21st, close of business, 5 p.m. You've got to have it in by the deadline. So we're looking forward to seeing them from you. At this time, Caitlin, I think we can open it up for other questions beyond the ones that have been posted. There's like 1 or 2 questions still that maybe rather than typing the answer in, I can just answer. One of the questions I see in the Q&A is, are there any criteria for how contaminated a site has to be to qualify? And the answer is no. It's going to be up to you. You could see that there are some fees associated with the program. So you'll want to run your own numbers and see if it makes sense for your site. We had another question about, can the remediation work begin once the application is submitted? We have already answered that question previously. Another question about how long does the application process take? We anticipate, I think we were able to, quickly go through one in like an hour or 2 ourselves, sample application. That said, of course, it's like doing your own taxes. Do you have all of the information available to put it into the system, or do you need to go out and gather that information? So, gathering the information may take you longer, but once you have it all at your fingertips, the actual online process should be about an hour or two. This was the question from Steve Barnett, and it was about the prevailing wage issue. And I think I saw, Janelle, that you had said you wanted to answer that live. Did you want me to read you the full question?
Oh, apologies. So as far as prevailing wage, welcome, Steve. It is a state requirement. It doesn't matter what program you apply for, whether it is a loan or a tax credit. Anytime there is a shiftment or movement of sticks and bricks, it is triggered. So it's not anything that we can avoid. It is one of the reasons we also do offer to stack our resources. So if this is a brownfield and you potentially have a project, let's just say it's residential or mixed use, you could also layer our Aspire tax credit program, which maximizes your return and gives more subsidy towards your total project cost based on the eligible uses.
And I think Steve also had another question in there that was, what proof of tax revenues are required in an application for remediation only projects, and how can tax revenues be estimated?
That question would have to be targeted to your accountant. We actually do not like to answer questions like that. There's different layers, and there could be additional information surrounding your portfolio or how you file. So that question would be one you would definitely want to defer to your tax credit. I'm sorry, your accountant for.
Thank you so much, Janelle. I see another question. We got a couple questions actually related to remediation only projects. So I'll take a moment to just kind of talk through that. We see that, this program, does include prevailing wage, for example. It includes a couple different compliance pieces associated to it. It includes the green remediation standards. If you're doing a project, all it is remediation. Like, you're not planning to do a big other development project. Right now, your project is just like, I got to get this site cleaned up so that it can be something when it grows up. If that is your project, it's going to be a lot easier for you to come in with the financials. It's going to, you're only going to be subject to the green remediation requirements. You're not going to be subject to green building requirements. Remember too, that the prevailing wage attaches to the site for 2 years after. So, if you have a project though, that is a big project that does, then you're going to come in and that's going to be your project, and that's what you're going to bring to us. But if you're just a remediation only project, you're going to bring us just the financials that show it's just a remediation only project. And that, while you might have a vision for the project in the future, you don't have an actual plan ready to go for that project, and, nothing sort of imminent happening. I saw there are a lot of people that are considering to come in for this tax credit. We look forward to working with you on your projects, bringing these brownfield sites back into something that's going to be positive for the community, for the state of New Jersey. And, really appreciate you taking the time today to work with us here on this webinar. And, for those of you who aren't watching us live that come in later and watch the recording, we appreciate you as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.